I am so fortunate. I have had, sometimes I'll sit and tell stories of different projects that I have been involved with or different things that I've been a part of. And I sit back and I go, I just feel very, very fortunate to have worked with some really amazing people. And I've had a lot of great opportunities. I actually started as a school teacher. So education is my background, and that's where I started in the classroom. And it was interesting because a friend of mine, this was back over 30 years ago, a friend of mine was telling me, oh, we've got to start a website and we need someone to write the content. I know you've got the summer off. Are you interested in marketing? And it had never crossed my mind. So I show up. It was the first time I had ever gone to a business meeting, and I wore a little Sunday go-to-meeting dress. And I went in with my manila folder and a legal pad. I had no idea what I was walking into. And that project grew into a real passion. And I immediately saw a connection between the storytelling that I loved that was so central to education, being very, very similar to the process of telling brand stories in the marketplace. And I was hooked, so I never went back permanently. And I found myself, we relocated to Michigan, and our lives and careers took many different directions. But I ended up primarily working in agencies. And for anyone who is ever launching into a career in marketing, public relations, or any form of communications, I always think it's really important, if you can, to start with an agency, because you get such a broad spectrum and you get access to entrepreneurial minds, and it's such a gift to be able to sit down with someone and hear their story and learn about their business goals. And so I was working for an agency in Detroit, Michigan, and I'm driving to a meeting with my boss, and we had just left a really top-level, multi-million-dollar contract conversation, and it was 2010, and this guy is a smooth operator, and all of a sudden, he nearly wrecks the car, and he says, oh, my God, there's that pawn shop. And I'm like, what is he talking about? Okay. And so he screeches into the parking lot of a pawn shop. And I had no idea at that time that there was a reality television show being filmed right there in Detroit. We walk in, and it looks like a circus inside this place. And there are people standing in line. It looks like the Santa Claus line at the mall for photographs with this family. And we just happened into this. And here, my boss, who is to this day my mentor, and he's the coolest operator I know, is so starstruck. And he looks at me sheepishly and he says, get their business. And so I'm like, okay, all right then. And I had no idea. So I start doing what at that time I was doing a lot of, which was business development and sales. And I start trying to reach out to this small business. And what was interesting is, despite the fact that they were seen nationally on a reality television show and seen internationally, this show was not nearly as popular in the U.S. as it was in international markets. I mean, this is literally a globally recognized brand, and they were managing most of their marketing and whatnot internally. Now, luckily, they're very, very smart business people and very, very savvy. But I just kept on keeping on, and through persistence, came to know them, came to really like them, and it grew into, long story short, I worked for them for 7 years. And that was the point when I really learned a lot about public relations, more in a publicist role. In the past, I had been more public relations, pretty buttoned up, working on more corporate communications. So it really rounded out my experience, gave me great exposure to, we were regularly on the Today Show and regularly on Good Morning America and all sorts of things. And so it was a very, very cool experience. And now I just have all of this exposure to things that I'm like, I got to do more of this. So the show ended. I launched on my own. I am now very, very fortunate to work with the most brilliant fellow marketers and publicists that I know. So I consider myself the richest person in the world. I really do.
Oh, that is okay. So I've heard a lot of founder stories on the Ask Brien radio show, and none of them has involved swerving, almost creating a car wreck to go into a pawn shop where a reality TV show is being filmed, and thus the magic happened. Like, that's amazing.
Who knew? Who knew?
Who knew? But I highlight that because you mentioned something I think is very, very important, which is storytelling, and how you became passionate about storytelling, and how I think it's really underestimated that people don't talk enough about how important it is just crafting your own story and sharing your own story. And now, of course, we know that I come from an audio background and a podcast production agency owner, so I'm going to always default to the storytelling side of things. But can you speak to why that is so important for a company, for a brand, for a founder, for an entrepreneur?
Sure. So public relations really is about telling your business story in a way that resonates with your target audience, right? So this is a story that should highlight, like, not just what makes your business unique and why it matters, not limited to your values and your brand story, but really focusing on how it benefits them. In other words, what's in it for me? So if I see you as a business owner appear as a subject matter expert in a media piece, I do want to understand your subject matter expertise. I do want to, I don't want to, derive some value for myself as well. And so it's really important that business owners not limit their PR efforts to just telling their own story, but also how it converts into value for the people that they work with. So it's all about building a reputation, not necessarily, public relations isn't necessarily focused on sales as much as it is building and maintaining a positive image for your business. You want to establish relevance, trust, and authority so that you're just that whatever your industry is, you got to be the top of mind choice when it comes time to call.
And I feel like that there's so many ways for that to be, those stories to be out there. And I'd love for you to share your expertise around how people are using social media versus, I think there's even some very specific terms for earned media versus other types of media. And I'd love to educate our audience on what are some of the differences on some of the platforms in the way your story can be told that showcase the business owner's expertise in the best light.
Yeah. So there's a gal, Jeannie Dietrich, who has a blog. I just love her content. It's called Spin Sucks. And she put together an acronym that describes it very well. It's called the PESO model. So it starts with paid media. So whenever we have an advertisement, right, like whether it's a Facebook ad or even a billboard, anything that we're paying for, that's paid media. It's pretty easy to understand. Shared media are things more like organic social. So when we post a picture from the shop or we post our blog and things that we are sharing perspective, that's shared. Owned media refers to content marketing. These are videos that we produce, our website, all the things that we own. Although, isn't it strange to talk about ownership in a digital world? It's not tactile things that we wrap our hands literally around, but all the media that we control is owned. And so earned media is really the realm where publicists and PR, and you don't necessarily, no one never needs to necessarily partner with there's more than one way to gain earned media. But earned media is described as those pieces of content that are generated by a third party. So ideally that would be like a journalist. A journalist is writing a story about a topic that's of broad interest, and then the entrepreneur finds themselves in the position of contributing to that story as a source based on their subject matter expertise. So earned media is really considered the brass ring. It carries a lot of weight because all of us know when someone else is talking about your story and telling your story, particularly if they come from a seat of authority, then that carries a lot of weight. Even now, we live in such a strange world for journalists, and they're under more pressure than ever. But even now, people just really do trust the stories that they read in the media, and so it is a goal of entrepreneurs who are subject matter experts to tell their story in earned media pieces as is appropriate. I say that because not every entrepreneur is appropriately positioned to serve as a source. So I think timing is really important. If you stood in front of a room full of folks and said, "Hey, business owners, who would sign up if I could send a reporter to your business tomorrow?" I think most entrepreneurs, because they're always so hungry to get their name in front of their target, most folks would say, "Oh, absolutely, I'm ready, bring them on." But actually, we really work with folks to make sure the timing is right because we want to make certain that our messages are consistent. Messaging should be consistent across all the platforms. So there's a little bit of groundwork that we recommend before you just start ringing up the local media and offering your subject matter expertise.
There was a decade of my life that I spent focusing on working with women entrepreneurs and startups, and that decade happened to overlap when the Oprah talk show was in its absolute prime. And part of the experience that we would put when we were putting women entrepreneurs through incubator workshops, they would write press releases for themselves, which is kind of ironic that was part of the exercise, but it was a visionary exercise where they would write a press release of where they saw themselves in 5 years. And their press releases almost always included being featured on Oprah. And when that actually would manifest for some of the entrepreneurs in the program, it really was all about timing because some of the entrepreneurs were ready for it and it launched their business and beyond belief. And in other cases, it was actually kind of detrimental because they weren't ready for I guess it's called the halo effect that happens. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I've seen it happen on more than one occasion. It's difficult to say no. Oprah comes knocking. I think there are very few of us that are self-disciplined enough to say no.
I mean, I would agree personally and professionally with that.
So I guess the best that we can do is and I love that you used the word manifest. Let's go ahead and start building that infrastructure now. And just assuming she is going to call or whatever your ideal media hit is, go ahead and prepare for that and expect that it is coming. And what I mean when I say prepare for that is to make sure that your messaging is consistent. And here's a good example. A lot of entrepreneurs, we try to delegate things, right? And I suffer from this. I absolutely suffer from this myself. So a lot of times I am that cobbler who has no shoes. Our brands, social media, of all the brands that we either manage or influence their social media, ours sometimes falls to the end, right? So if I knew that Oprah were calling or if I set that as a goal, then I would need to make sure that I am formulating talking points. What are the key messages? What am I really, really, really best in class at? Focus on those things.
I'm going to pause you right there while we take a break, and then when we come back, we're going to get very specific about what some of those key messages are. But you are listening to KHTS FM 98.1, AM 1220, and HometownStation.com. Welcome back to KHTS FM 98.1, AM 1220, and HometownStation.com. We are having such an interesting and compelling conversation with Cindy Harrison of Synaptic Approach. And Cindy, before the break, you were really about to reveal some very tactical but really important information around what to do and how to prepare for when the big media comes knocking. And we were talking about key messaging. So I would love to pick up there.
Sure. So sometimes we were talking about making sure that messaging does not get diluted across delegation. So here's what I mean by that. I work with a lot of small business owners and leaders, and if they're going to scale, then they have to delegate, right? We all of us only have 10 fingers. And so one of the things that we work with people a lot is to make sure that if they have someone who is delegated to their messaging, say, for example, on social media, if their social media channels have a culture or a theme, a feel, a vibe, if you will, that is inconsistent with their business values, their business culture, then that's going to be really confusing for the audience as that audience passes through that customer journey, right? So if, for example, you're looking for let's say, an interior designer, and you love the content that they're putting out on Instagram, you love the photography, and it really resonates with you. But then when you visit their showroom and you meet the actual designer, you find that their approach is really, really rigid, and it wasn't anything that you were expecting based on that Instagram content that you had seen. Well, that is the responsibility of the business owner. That's an opportunity for the business owner. So as the entrepreneur, you need to make sure that whenever you delegate messaging to other members of your team, that you're all working from a platform that starts with your core values. So as often as we hear it, sometimes we set up, mission, vision, values on like particular occasions, maybe at launch or on a strategic planning retreat, and then we forget about them. But it's really important that those are living, breathing pieces of our brand and our brand story that reflect the way we actually do business with one another inside of our organization, with customers inside and out. And that way, our messaging is consistent because, again, if someone sees a member of your team maybe on a morning TV show, again, I'm just using an interior designer, but it could be anyone. You could be a foot doctor, and, track season is starting up again. So the foot doctor appears on the morning television station. And then a viewer who is interested in something that they learn about that particular practitioner, they want to follow up. They go to your social media and you've not updated anything for many months. Or they sign up for an email newsletter on your website and they get like an error message. So that's why I say start with the consistency now. Go ahead and start manifesting that. Maybe the Kelsey brothers, whatever your brass ring. We used Oprah a moment ago. We used Oprah as whatever your goal is for your dream media hit, start back, work your way backwards and be ready when they show up in your parking lot.
You, without even knowing it, you stepped onto one of my biggest soapboxes, which is an absolute importance of your internal communications matching your external communications. And when I left the broadcast radio business and started my own business full time, that is fundamentally my mission and purpose, was to help educate people about how important it was, because we would create amazing advertising campaigns and then drive traffic to a business. And they would get there, and then the employees wouldn't know that they were having a sale, or they wouldn't have any idea of what, essentially Addy Award-winning commercials were working, but the customer experience wouldn't be congruent. And so the complaint was they didn't think that their ads or their PR was working. And it was a direct result of not having the internal communications throughout from the founder, CEO, manager, down to the person who is at the cash register. Like, it's so important. And I do not think it's talked about enough, because people are always focusing in the language today is top of the funnel, get them in, get top of the funnel, get them in, get them in. And what they're not focusing on sometimes is their internal communications and their systems to be able to support the level of growth that they experience from driving traffic to the top of the funnel.
Amen. And really, truly, wouldn't we rather have, one or two quality depending on your business model. Obviously, if you're selling donuts, you can't afford to sell one or two donuts. So this is, would be scaled to your business model. But wouldn't we rather have a manageable number of incoming clients that we can have a long-term relationship with, rather than tens of thousands of eyeballs that have no interest? Those are always going to be the people who make negative comments and get inside of our head and throw us off of our game anyway. So I do think that the bridge between having social media content that's reflective of your brand, I would say less is more when it is consistent. I would say, instead of looking at those vanity metrics, instead of beating yourself up over, I don't post frequently enough, as long as your messaging is consistent and you are aiming at, it's spearfishing. For most of our businesses, it really is a spearfishing game rather than these wide net catching many, many shrimp. And again, we have to adjust these things and scale them to the type of business that we have. But I think there's too much focus of the I think a lot of the marketing talking heads are really talking to one another. So the way that an entrepreneur who has an online-only product, the way they market online-only products, and I'm talking about coaching, courses, that sort of thing, that takes up so much of the conversational space about the topic of marketing that I think a lot of brick and mortar professional services businesses or retail establishments, a lot of businesses are like, wait, so I need to be doing this same sort of, this content hamster wheel. And so that's why we really do like the peso model. We really do like focusing on earned media and establishing relevance, trust, and authority in the industry-specific audiences that are going to pay the bills.
And, I want to point out an even more subtle takeaway for people who are listening today, and that is how important it is as an entrepreneur to align with other like-minded entrepreneurs who feel the same way and are really going to understand your mission and values and how you do business, because like the conversation that we're having right now, nothing about it has been pre-planned, but we're so aligned in everything that we are talking about philosophically. And for Producer Podcast and our podcasters and your marketing and PR firm, like we have so much synergy literally because both of the founders, you and me, have such like-minded perspectives of how we want to do business and how we want to do business with our clients. And I think it's so important for people to seek out And whether it's mentors or whether it's like-minded partnerships that have good synergy with your business model, I just think it's amazing. And that wasn't necessarily a question, but a statement.
Yeah.
But I really do. And we're going to talk more about that, but we have to take a break for our sponsor, because speaking of like-minded, if we didn't have a sponsor, we wouldn't be able to have this conversation. So, Jen, tell us about Legal Steps.
And we want to say thank you to Legal Steps here at the Ask Brien Show. It's spelled LEGALSTEPZ. That's with a Z. .com. So Legal Steps makes it really easy. I mean, it's like, Legal Steps 101. It could not be any simpler. I took one of the courses 5-6 months ago just to kind of get a feel for it. I'm not out here to start my own business, but I kind of wanted to have an idea of what I was talking about. And boy, coming from not having any sort of legal background, any sort of business background, it is really simple. So you should be able to do it. If I can step my way through it, you certainly can. If you're looking to start your own business, you're an entrepreneur, you don't know where to begin, you've always had this amazing idea and people tell you, man, you should really be selling this. Well, your first step should be going to legalsteps.com. The courses are all very affordable, under $150. So don't let something like finances, obviously, times are tough. Everything is really tight right now, but this is really not that much money in the grand scheme of things. It's going to help you get ahead. You can register a trademark. You can form an S corporation, form an LLC. Those are the 3 different courses that are offered. The experts that are at legalsteps.com, really experts with a capital E, with over 30 years experience. So you're not getting somebody who's kind of brand new and a little bit green. You have people who know what they're doing. And as you're going through the courses, if you get to the point where you're stuck and frustrated, I just don't know what I'm doing anymore, they'll just go ahead and do it for you. They'll take your hand and walk you through the rest of it. All of these courses are reviewed by the attorneys that I just mentioned, those experts with 30 years of experience. So you know that you're answering the questions the right way. And the other thing that I really love, not only is it efficient on time, I was able to take my course in less than 2 hours at my own pace, which is really huge. I think for a lot of people, we're busy. We have maybe another job. We have spouse, children, dogs, whatever responsibilities that are pulling you left and right. So you don't want to have to be tied down to someone else's schedule. You can do this at your own pace. Again, like I said, pause, rewind. The screen and screen option is great. So as you're taking your course, you can actually see on your screen what the legal expert is also looking at. So you know that you're answering that question the right way. And did you fill out that form properly? There's no unknown. There's no questions that are left out there. Legalsteps.com, LEGALSTEPZ.com.
Thanks, Jen.
You bet.
I'm kind of known for, you may not know this, Cindy, but I'm known for a pivot during the show. And I really actually teed us up for it a little bit before, but not intentionally, about how important it is to have synergy and align your business with the businesses that have the same types of mission and values and goals and objectives that you do, because that just makes everything, reduces so much friction and just sets everyone up for success. And my pivot is to really talk about one of my most favorite things, which is podcasting and podcasters. And I love that you have really taken a stake and put a stake in the ground with supporting podcasters with PR. And even to the point where you have the podcastpublicist.com domain, which of course I love for branding purposes. But could you share with us, what was it that made you pivot in a sense, but not totally, obviously, but really align with podcasters and bring that as a specific service that you provide for podcasters? What was your passion behind that?
Sure. I love that question. And in 2015, I was involved with a syndicated podcast through CBS syndication, and it was called Play.it. And the lesson that I learned, it was not a successful endeavor, and I was a really low, a very high level. A lot of really smart people just weren't able to make that work, and essentially it boiled down to I think that what ended up happening was it was too difficult to grow podcast audiences in mass. And so, in other words, the wisdom became, if you have a podcast and you want to grow your audience, the only people that are going to listen are people that are already listening to other podcasts. So there are podcast consumers, and then everybody else is just not. And at that time in 2015, that seemed to be the conventional wisdom of podcasting. Well, fast forward all these years now, we got involved with a client who is in the podcasting space, and I'm like, oh, wow, I used to love podcasting. It's been a minute. And so we took a deep dive, and we start really trying to educate ourselves, bring ourselves up to speed. And I'll be doggone, they're still saying that in the podcasting world. Like, they're still talking about guesting on other podcasting shows. And if you take a deep dive, the audience has grown. Podcasting is now mainstream. We're living in the days that back in 2015, podcasting was hoping for. So we're here. The podcast audience has arrived. At that time, it was, I can remember asking people like, hey, have you ever listened to a podcast? And there were a goodly number of folks who had never even heard of it. Now, that's really not the case. There are voracious, it's like reading. There are people that are more voracious consumers of podcasting than others, but really it is more mainstream now. And as such, we feel that it is time for, when folks are ready for a publicist, and not every podcast host is a subject matter expert, and not every business owner is ready to be a guest on a podcast. But when they are, and they're ready to tell that brand story and share their subject matter expertise, we feel like we're in a great position to bridge that gap for them and to help flatten that learning curve, because there is a learning curve into how to pitch yourself and how to speak the language of media. Journalists are like a lot of us. They're stretched thin, and so we, as publicists, we are able to help you make that first impression the right way, speaking, really optimizing the opportunity right out of the gate, instead of trying to sort of bounce around and find your own way and accidentally end up on the Oprah show.
Well, we are going to, I can't believe how fast this goes. We are going to take another break. You're listening to KHTS FM 98.1 AM, 1220 and HometownStation.com. Welcome back. You're listening to KHTS FM 98.1 AM 1220 and HometownStation.com. And this conversation is so amazing. I can't believe that we're already almost to our just not really stopping point, but definitely moving forward closer to the top of the hour. So I want to be sure, Cindy, that people can find you. I know we mentioned the podcastpublicist.com, but you also have so much great resources and other information. So what is the best way, if someone wants to connect with you, what is the best way for them to reach out and be able to learn more about you, engage with you and your team?
Sure. So podcastpublicist.com, we've got a checklist there, and it's not limited to podcast hosts. Really, anyone can apply with these questions that you would ask yourself before you engage with a publicist, because there are so many things that a business owner can and should do on their own to prepare to get that story told. And to fit public relations into their business strategy. So there's a free downloadable checklist that really applies to any subject matter expert, just to walk them through some of those things that we've talked about today about being consistent in your storytelling and your branding.
Well, I know people are going to absolutely want to plug into that, and I am just going to give a shameless plug for, we work with, hundreds of podcasters, obviously, at Produce Your Podcast, and one of the things a lot of people start guesting on podcasts before they actually even start their own podcast, and so it's just a really, really great to be able to connect with an expert like you to really help people jumpstart and really accelerate that pathway. And so I encourage everybody to go and check that out. And if you weren't able to write that down or you're afraid you're going to forget it, don't worry, because the live radio show is also released as a podcast. And of course, that's the Ask Brien, AskBrien podcast. And you can find it wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And this episode, I know, will be a fan favorite for sure. So we have a few minutes left, and I really want to basically speak to the entrepreneur, the business owner, the person who is ready to get started. What can people do if they're ready to get started with PR? They don't even know where to turn or what to do, but they know it's an important part of building their brand story and really even as a lead generation tool. What are some of the steps you would recommend?
So I would get clear on my goals and what is the newsworthy portion of my business. So, of course, if you're living inside of the four walls of your business, everything is big news to us, right? But if we want to have a meaningful relationship with media, whether those be podcast hosts or journalists, bloggers, or others, we really need to nail down what is widely interesting about my subject matter expertise. And so many businesses want to focus on, hey, we're having a big sale or we're having a big promotion. And really what they're missing is their best opportunity is to add value as a subject matter expert. And so really, if you can do the job of helping out that journalist, help a reporter out, and help them accomplish their job, because they have a job of building news stories that are broadly interesting, widely interesting. They have goals and things on their own plate, and so if you can make that easy for them, and reach out and say, maybe you're not aware, but X and Y and Z is a really hot topic, and I can offer your audience 3 ways that they can save money in this area of their life, or 3 ways that they can fill in the blank. And if you can boil your expertise down to those bite-sized nuggets that will really help add pack a lot of punch for that journalist, then there's no way that they aren't going to welcome the opportunity to work with you.
I love that. Okay, so one last question for you. What has been your biggest challenge that you've had to overcome as a founder and entrepreneur?
Ooh, definitely scaling.
60 seconds or less.
Definitely scaling. I'm really, really fortunate and spoiled, frankly. The team we have in place now, we have very, very complementary talents, and we work well together, but it is really difficult to scale and to welcome new folks onto this platform that you've built. Your reputation is everything, and when you bring on new folks onto the team, they are a part of that reputation. So that's been my ongoing challenge. I'm really proud of how it's going, and our team works really, really hard to serve our clients. So far so good, but it has not been easy.
I concur, but I've also met your team, and they are fantastic. Okay, everybody, thanks. Thank you, Cindy. Thanks for such a great show. You've been listening to KHTS FM 98.1 AM, 1220, and HometownStation.com.